What's going on, guys? Kevin here from thesportsgeek.com, and in this video I'm going to talk about how we can properly create DFS trends and models to help you win more money at DraftKings and FanDuel this year. Alright, so I'm logged into Fantasy Labs here. I've got an NFL model pulled up for this video, and in this part of the video I'm going to talk about how to properly create an NFL DFS model and how not to create an NFL DFS model. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how not to create it, and I think this is the way that a lot of people will go about it when they first sign up for Fantasy Labs. So down here we've got the sliders that make up the model, and what you can do is you can move these sliders until you got 100 points to work with. So I think a lot of people are going to come in here and start moving around these sliders, click the update button when they've got it set, see that it's at 4.57. They might try to improve on that, so they might move this down, this up, click update, and then they might move this down, click update, and keep going like that until they get a pretty high number in the plus minus here. And although that might work sometimes, maybe the first couple weeks you actually have some good games from the people at the top of these models, in the future it's not going to work out well for you. There's no thought behind those models, and they're going to regress back to at least not as good as what it could be if you actually put some thought into it. So the way to properly create models here on Fantasy Labs, or basically anytime you're creating a model for anything DFS related, is to think about what you're doing before you build the model, and you don't want to click that update button until you've got your points set. So sometimes it might work out and sometimes it won't, but if you do the proper planning and put some thought into it, you should be able to come up with a pretty good model. So for each position, it's going to be a little different, but what you want to do beforehand is kind of think about which sliders are important for that position. So you don't want to be using every slider here. You want to try to limit it, maybe 10 sliders max would be my max for each position, around 10 sliders. So what you might think for the QB, you might think about Vegas score. So when the team has a high team total, they're probably going to score more fantasy points. So you don't want to overweight that, but you do want to have that factor in your model. So you might set that at 20. That might be 1/5 of your model, just going with a quarterback with a high team total. They're facing a weak defense. So going into that, Vegas score and defensive unit rating are probably pretty similar. This is the percentile rank for how well a defense has defended a particular position in the past. So if a defense has been awful against quarterbacks, that team's probably going to have a higher Vegas score. So that's kind of factored in together. So we're not going to put too much into this, but we're going to put 15 points in. So we're facing a team with a weaker defense against quarterbacks. This quarterback's team is expected to score some points because we've rated the Vegas score at 20. And then we're going to look at projected plus minus. So the guys at Fantasy Labs do a good job with their projections. I'm going to weight that at 20 because we want quarterbacks that are projected to score more points than their salary is they're expected to with the salary. So now we've got 55 of 100 points used. I'm going to go down, and I want a quarterback with a pretty high floor, meaning even if they have a bad game, they're probably still going to put up a decent amount of DraftKings points for us, maybe 10 DraftKings points or so that we're not completely out of it if they have a bad game. So I'll put 10 points into the floor. And then we want guys for GPPs that can score a ton of points. We want quarterbacks that have the ability to rush for touchdowns or maybe throw 5 touchdowns, or teams that throw a lot. So we want to move this ceiling up to 15, let's say. So there's thought behind every time I move a slider up, and we've got 20 more points to work with. So we do get extra points for rushing touchdowns here. So I'm going to have rushing points set at 5 for quarterbacks. I don't want to weigh it too heavily because sometimes it can be random, but sometimes we do want running quarterbacks like Cam Newton. And then we're not going to put in projected plays or market share, but I will go with some upside. We want guys who can put up some big monster games for GPPs. So I'll set that for 10. And then maybe I'll go pro trends rating 5. So I had a reason for everything. Let's look at the other sliders, just make sure I didn't miss anything. So there's nothing that I really missed. Maybe you would want bargain rating, and after you created this model, Before you hit update, you say, okay, I missed out on bargain rating. I definitely wanted some on bargain rating. So I'll move Vegas score down to 15 and bargain rating 5. And now you go through it and you've got everything that you wanted to touch on in your model. And you don't have too many sliders set and everything looks pretty good. So now you click update. 4.22. So that actually performed better than the other model I just had that was all pretty random. And then going forward, this model is probably going to be a lot more efficient and a lot more profitable than the other one, which was just random sliders moved up and down random places which without much thought. So right there, I just created a pretty solid quarterback model without putting too much thought into it. Usually I would put a little more thought into it, but I was just creating that pretty quickly for the video. And you can see all of the stuff I did made some sense for quarterbacks, and we came up with a pretty good model at plus 4.22. So that's how to properly create a model on Fantasy Labs. You want to do that for each position. So running back, you might be looking at different things than quarterback, and receivers, you might value different things than running back. Every position has their own thought process behind it. You want to think before you click that update, you want to make sure you have that model set, and you want to make sure you've got all the sliders that you want to include, and you have reasoning for each slider being set at what they are. So that's how to properly create a model. Now let's take a look at trends. Okay, so now moving on to trends here. We've got an awesome trends tool here at Fantasy Labs. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend you use it. You can do some awesome stuff with it, but I want to talk about what you shouldn't do. So I think this is what a lot of people might do. If they come into here and they're looking at quarterbacks at DraftKings, a lot of people might start messing around with this and say, okay, let's see how quarterbacks do if they are 6,000 and less. Okay, that came up negative. So let's see if they are a favorite. Where are we here? Vegas filters. Let's see how they're doing if they're a favorite. Okay, they're not doing too good as a favorite. So never mind. Let's look at dogs that are that price. So right there, that's your first mistake. You went to look for favorites and you saw they weren't doing good, so you went to dogs instead. And then you're like, okay, let's see if they're, I think if they're at home, they're going to do better because home dogs always do better. So you look here and you say, okay, I'm right. So home dogs are doing a little better than visitors. So I'm getting closer to being positive. Now let's look at September because we're in week 1 here. So I'm going to look to time filter. I'm going to go to the month and go to September. Oh, they're not doing good in September. But look at this. They're doing really good in November. Wow, I'm going to keep this for November. I want this trend here for November. So I'm going to make it November, actually. I don't really care about September right now. And I'm going to look at, he's the underdog. He's home. He's a cheap quarterback. I'm going to say that the opponent win percentage is less than 55%. Oh, wow, look at this. I got plus 4.53 for this trend. I'm going to use all these quarterbacks in November when they're 6,000 and less, and they're home, and they're the dog, and it's in November, and the opponent's team's win percentage is 22 to 55%. So I think a lot of people will make that mistake when they're creating a trend. They're just going to go about it really randomly and just kind of click things until they get a positive plus minus here on the points, and that is going to cause some troubles for you. Usually this number over time is just going to go back towards 0. There's no real science behind this. There's no reasoning why these quarterbacks are plus 4.53 really. So that's not a way to create a trend. Now I'll show you how you should properly create a trend. Okay, so when you're creating a trend, you want to have your prediction or your hypothesis before you create your trend. So you want to test something when you're creating your model, and you want to know what that is beforehand, and you want to have your prediction. So randomly off the top of my head, I'm going to look at QBs let's say we're going to look in the middle of the season. So before everyone has a real good idea on how teams actually are. Usually you don't have a real good idea until about maybe week 10. So in weeks 4 to 10, so I'll go QBs in weeks 4 to 10 versus teams that are 500 and above. And I'm going to make these QBs between 6,700 and 7,000 on DraftKings. So this is really random. It's pretty narrow focus, but it kind of does make sense. So my idea was that if we can get some cheap quarterbacks in weeks 4, let's move this actually to week 3. So I think after 2 weeks, you can't really get much of an idea on how teams are doing. It's early in the season. So I think from weeks 3 to 10, we might be able to get some quarterbacks that are undervalued. They're playing against teams that are above 500, or we'll say that are 500 or above. So I'm going to see if we can find some value in these cheaper QBs. They're between 6 and 7, so we know that they're probably decent quarterbacks in decent spots. But I like to go with quarterbacks in that range on DraftKings quite a bit. I don't like to pay up too much at quarterback. So that's a good range. And again, they're going against teams that are 500 or above, and it's still fairly early in the season. It's not later in the season when we have a really good idea on who are the top teams. So they're facing good teams, but it's still early in the season. So let's take a look and let's create that trend. So the first thing I'm going to do is create that salary. 7,000. Oops. 7,000. And then we're going to go weeks. So time. So it's not going to be weeks. It's going to be their game number. So it's going to be game number 3 to 10. And their opponent win percentage is 500 or above. So 50 or above. So I think I got everything set there. Quarterback, salary, 3 and 10. Teams that are 500 or above. Okay. Looking at that right away, we've got plus 1.62 points. So my prediction was that these quarterbacks would have value, and I was right about that. It's nothing crazy, not like plus 5 points or anything, but right away, that's a pretty solid trend. These quarterbacks are expected to score 15 points, and they're scoring you 17 points. So looking at past results, let's see the most recent. We got Carson Palmer. So there's actually quite a few in 2015. So Carson Palmer, the most recent one, he was expected to score 17 points. He was facing Cincinnati, who had a winning record during that time of the season. And so he was priced pretty cheaply at 6,700, and he put up 29 DraftKings points. And then the next one, let's see where it was. Eli Manning was facing a good Patriots team. He was priced at 6,700 as well. So that expected points would be 17.88, and he put up 25 points. As you can see, it takes us, wow, what's this one? 17 points and put up 49. Drew Brees, wow. So this was actually a pretty good trend towards the end of last year. So it took us down to November 1st last year, before the first quarterback that didn't meet expectations. Where are we looking at? Okay, right here. So yeah, not everyone's going to meet expectations for this. It's not a huge plus minus. We're getting plus 1.62, but it's definitely a profitable trend. It's definitely makes sense, and it's definitely something that you could look at and use in your research. So you wouldn't want to just blindly go and use these quarterbacks. But if you have a quarterback that you're liking, maybe you have 2 quarterbacks that you're liking, and one of these fits this trend and one doesn't, then maybe you could lean towards that quarterback. So that's how to properly create a trend. It was pretty random on the spot, and it worked out well for us, plus 1.62. So there's a ton of different things you can think of like that to create your trends, but you want to have your prediction and you want to have it narrowed down before you get into the trend tool and before you start testing and messing around with things. So a lot of times people, they might think that they're going to create this trend like this, and then they might get to the last filter and they might be like, oh, well, let's just see if we can put 40% here. Okay, 40% works too. Let's see if we can do 35. So they start messing around with this until they find a better number than what we came up with. Let's see. Yeah, negative. Yeah, so they would just mess around until, I don't know if you're going to be able to find anything better than what we came up with, but they might mess around until they do, and if they do, then they'll keep it like that. But that's not the way to do it. You want to have your idea beforehand. Go into it, make that exact model. If it works out well, then keep it in your model so you can always look back at it and see if people meet that model for each week. And if it doesn't work out, just delete it and make another hypothesis, make another prediction, and make another trend and see how that does. So that's how to properly create profitable NFL DFS trends. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you click that like or the thumbs up button on YouTube. That will support my YouTube channel and let me know to make more videos like this. Good luck, guys.